far. Believe me, come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a fi we we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a fi we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Ufa. Believe me, come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Ufa. Believe me, come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Ufa. Believe me, come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Ufa. Believe me, come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, bad love them. Yeah, just send me Bernie Mac and Kenny. To the mad rapper, just set to stone jam. You are the commander because this a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala.
Brother Ako Mutota. Good morning, Brother Ako.
Morning, Sister YaYa. Morning to our guest, Brother Rolando Cocom and Giovanni Pinelo. Good morning to you both. Good to meet you, and good morning to our listening audience.
Thanks, Brother Ako. Good morning. We have two guests. Brother Giovanni Pinelo, who is a Senior Research and Education Officer at the, I don't know when I want to learn to say this thing. I just used to say ISCR and niche. It's the Institute for Social and Cultural Research under the National Institute of Culture and History. And then we have the Director, Rolando Cocom. Oh, no, forgive me. Oh, no, know how to go through menopause for years and a hat. So I have to have the fan on. I had a sweat bad. Brother Pinelo and Brother Rolando, how are you this morning?
Hi, good morning, Sister Sarah, Brother Ako, and the audience. Good to be back. Doing well.
Yes, we're happy for the big respect to you, Sister YaYa, for all the good work that you do. And to Brother Ako, it's a pleasure to meet you and hear about all the good work that you they do in Trinidad, but also across the region. Big respect to you both.
Respect. I don't know when I see her in the China the house, highest a conversation. I don't know I'm people African descendants, specialized as African, as Black people, and about African people from the continent of Africa within the context of this territory known as Belize. But we know the usual. So Brother Ako moment. Brother Ako, Ako have a bin star. We just never know Brother Ako the star. Brother Ako's, it was his suggestion for us to focus on the Caribbean in 2025 because the majority of people in the Caribbean are African descendants, racialized as Black people, because of the human trafficking, kidnapping of enslaved African from the continent to this region by the British, by the French, by the Spaniards, by the Portuguese, by the Dutch, the whole kitany. So there needed to be a space where we look at news stories because these news stories are impacting our lives. But there's no place or part you could go and at least make some connection as African people. So It's a brother Akko Lane. You have to know your lane, you know. It's a brother Akko Lane. This is not my lane. Brother Akko,
Yes, Sister YaYa.
featuring.
In terms of the news, we have a few pieces from across the Caribbean. The first piece we are going to deal with is from St. Vincent, and this has to do with the island of Baliso. For those who may not be familiar, the island of Baliso was the site of a massacre by the British in the 1790s against the Garifuna people. For a number of years, activists have been placating the government to acquire the island because it was privately owned. After decades of resistance to British colonial rule, nearly 5,000 Garifuna people, descendants of Africans and indigenous Kalinagos, were ejected from their homes on mainland St. Vincent in 1796 and then interned on the island of Baliso with no shelter, no food, and very little water. The island was privately owned later on, and recently the government bought the island after much activism by people in St. Vincent and Garifunas abroad. This is a historic site that should have been long ago under the control of the people of St. Vincent. We therefore congratulate all the activists and others who fought for this sacred site to be returned to the people of St. Vincent. The government has now decided to acquire that site, and it will be a pilgrimage site, which it has always been for Garifuna people who trace their ancestry to that island nation, St. Vincent, and particularly the island of Baliso. The second piece of news from the Caribbean will be on Grenada. As some may remember, Grenada observed on March 13th the anniversary of the Grenada Revolution with commemorative activities. As some would know, the Grenada Revolution collapsed on October 1983, and the US invaded and occupied Grenada. Nonetheless, the revolution of March 13th, which lasted for 9 years, from 1979 to 1983, was a historic moment, not just for Grenada, but for the entire Caribbean. Third news item is Haiti. As we all know, Haiti has been in a state of violence perpetrated by outside forces. And I'm going to read a piece from the Miami Herald, which is dated March 14th. And the piece says that a shipping company in Miami, in shipping material, they investigated the material that were being shipped. And they found items which looked pretty tame, like tires, bicycles, refrigerators, and mattresses. On further examination, buried inside the container were military-grade rifles, Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifles and silencers, and Uzi machine guns, along with dozens of other high-powered guns and tens of thousands of bullets for different kinds of weapons. This was discovered just on March 14th out of a report on the Miami Herald. So we know that despite the fact that in the Caribbean we don't produce weapons, weapons are getting into the Caribbean, and particularly in Haiti, from the very country that is trying to put sanctions on people for various kinds of activities. So that is on Haiti. The other item is from Trinidad and Tobago. The current Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, has indicated he will step down today. He's expected to be replaced by Mr. Stuart Young, the current Minister of Energy. Mr. Rowley has been a two-term Prime Minister, and based on the report coming out of Trinidad, he will step down today and make way for Mr. Young. Next article is coming out of Jamaica, the next news item. And the question in the Jamaican Gleaner by a piece by a woman called Amanda Quest. And the question she asked is, where is Jamaica's commitment to elder abuse? I'm going to read just a piece of it. And it says, just last week, I found myself watching intently as a spoiled, entitled man-child harassed his elderly mother for money to feed his voracious gambling habit. His response became increasingly menacing and intimidating when he realized she was reluctant to give in to his demands. he continued to badger her in a public space. And the writer says, even though the incident was staged, I was still moved. The question is, where is the Caribbean's response to increasing elder abuse? This is a problem in the Caribbean, not only in Jamaica, throughout the Caribbean. We are seeing increasingly cases of elder abuse by children and grandchildren in the Caribbean. And this is an issue that governments have to put more stringent policies to counter as we move forward. The last piece of news concerns 5 Caribbean nations. St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Kitts, Nevis, and Cuba have been included in a proposed list of countries facing potential travel restrictions under the Trump administration. The reasons for this categorization was not given. The new restrictions, they are not related to the proposed visa ban on Caribbean territories that the Trump administration recently threatened to impose regarding countries who facilitate doctors from Cuba for healthcare. The Trump administration indicated that countries that continue to have Cuban doctors and medical personnel, their leaders will be faced with bans, visa bans from entering the United States. Consequently, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, said that she's prepared to lose her visa as she's not going to follow the advice or the threats from the US government. And likewise, the outgoing Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, indicated as such that he too is prepared to lose his visa. As most people who will be reading the news would remember, the Trump administration has put tremendous sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela in an attempt to promote regime change. And this new visa ban and the other restrictions being placed on Caribbean countries is to pressure Caribbean countries to act in accordance with US interests and not necessarily in the interests of the Caribbean. And those are the news pieces I wanted to read today.
That deep, that big, that inclusive, and I appreciate all the work you did, Brother Ako, for that to happen. Just to add a little to what you said, it was in March of, it was 228 years ago this month that Garifuna people were put on board a boat at Balisao to head to Honduras. So this month is the 228 years of them being sent from Balisao to Honduras. From the Belize side, on Wednesday, the 12th of March, there was the general elections in Belize, and there has been a cabinet shift, a cabinet reshuffle, I should say. And the reason why, usually they think now, for children think now, I don't pay much attention to anything, but in this case it matters. Christy, if you could show that cabinet reshuffle, just so people could know that this was a press release that was sent out on March 15, 2025, yesterday. But the reason why UEF have a particular interest in the cabinet shuffle, because UEF has an ongoing hair campaign. Today is day 194 of that hair campaign. And so, in the hair campaign, we pressure the government of Belize to stop hair discrimination as it relates to students in schools at all levels, private and public school. We've since expanded the campaign to include employees in the private and public sector. So you will have to engage the Minister of Education and the Minister of Labor. Right before the election, the then Minister of Education, Francis Fonseca, suddenly agreed with me that yes, we need one changing the hair policy at Belize. He said, make a talk to him after the election. Well, after the election, he had no more the Minister of Education. That never stopped me on behalf of UEF for protest the day before election in front of the Ministry of Education building without a permit, because the police department no one give me a permit. And so that campaign continues. But now we have to engage the new Education Minister, who is Oscar Kenny. I believe that I'm a former school teacher. And then we have a new Labor Minister. The Labor Minister used to be Oscar Kenya. The new Labor Minister is Florence Marin Jr. And then, bring it full circle while we have a two brother here with we. UEF not known for engage the people who represent the government, primarily because of who I am and how I move. But I give thanks to them two brother that the longest relationship I've had with some people, working for the government of Belize. It's a thriving and growing relationship. I consider them a brother, and they're professionals as well. So I really want to thank them. But we're in conversation about a future collaboration. So for that reason there, who the Minister of Culture is mattered to you here. Give thanks, the Minister of Culture are the same Minister of Culture, Francis Fonseca. So, come fast forward, we, UEF and NICH, ISCR, because of the collaboration what we have going on, have a responsibility because we have our own media house, to come to the public and build awareness, share knowledge as it relates to African descendants racialized as black people who in 1888, 50 years after the legal end to chattel enslavement of African people in British territories, Belize in particular, organized for build one Emancipation Institute known as the People's Hall at the corner of Church and Duck Lane. So the reason why I didn't do the answer it. So for frame the conversation, thanks to Rolando, I'm the fire stick will get me going. I said to Rolando, make we look for the two mindsets from the time African people were kidnapped, human trafficked, forced to work for free labor. They don't get paid, the enslavers did. From then up until 2025, I have found, and I'm going to give up the mic, they could tell me their 2 cents, including you, Brother Akko. I have found that there are two mindsets. There are people who I would say retain more of their African values and identity and think for themselves and work in at their best interest, then decide what's best for them. Like that group, led by Simon Lamb in 1888 and 1889, who were very clear that they come from the colored population and they want to get educated. Then you had another mindset of what we call it the growing middle class people, where they don't want to deal with enslavement, they don't want to deal with emancipation, they want to deal with political power. That's how I define them two mindsets. And I would say in 2025, we still have them two mindsets. So, Brother Akko, since you are the co-host, you going first, then Pinelo, then Rolando. I want you to tell me what the for to read about the mindsets of African people who originally came to these shores and the mindsets of people who are the African descendants now. I don't tell you the two white feel. You have like grassroots people growing up like me and Brother Akko, and then you have establishment people. Go ahead, Brother Akko.
So again, good morning to our guests, Brother Giovanni, Pinelo, and Brother Rolando Cocom. So to respond to what you said, Sister YaYa, it's a situation I have commented on regularly whenever I've spoken on any issues in the Caribbean, whether it's radio or not. And up to a couple of weeks ago, I did an interview in Jamaica, and I made the point, and it's a statement being made by our academics in the Caribbean about post-colonial. So every time you see any academic document or conferences among the university elites in the Caribbean, you hear about post-colonial. My argument is that we are not in any post-colonial state in the Caribbean. We are in a neo-colonial state, and neo means new. And my argument is simple. In Trinidad and Tobago, where I am and where I'm from, our capital is called Port of Spain. You understand? Port of Spain. Which means we at one point in history, we were one of the main ports of the Spanish Empire. And so we are still saddled with that colonial relic of a name. Now, if you go to the City Hall in Port of Spain, you would see there's a little plaque, at least it was there maybe 20 years ago, in which the indigenous people called that part of Trinidad Conquerabia, which is the indigenous name. But yet, we have not adopted that name as the capital city. Most of our streets are named after former British criminals and British queens and kings. And that is repeated throughout the Caribbean. Georgetown, Guyana, Bridgetown, Barbados, and so on. So we are not in any post-colonial state. We are in a neo-colonial state, right? And to address your issue about the mindset, at the advent of our so-called independence, you had two sets of, if you want to call it, discourses in the Caribbean. There were some who wanted to retain a lot of the colonial attachments, and there were a group of people who were distinctly anti-colonial. So I think the situation was those who were anti-colonial. And you can see this from, I think, Brother Giovanni mentioned it in the 1930s, that throughout the Caribbean, there were a series of labor revolts, which began in Trinidad in 1937, June 1937. And it spread to St. Vincent, to Barbados, throughout the island chain. And while the popular sentiment were for sentiments were for better wages and better working conditions, the real struggle was against British colonialism. So it was really an anti-colonial struggle that assumed the form of a workers' revolt. And these have been the two mindsets in the Caribbean. So on one side, you had those who were prepared to defend the crown, and on the other side, you had the workers and the masses who were prepared to destroy the anti-colonial system. And I will end with a bit to give one example. In my immediate community, not too far from where I live, we discovered that there was a labor revolt there in which the British had shot about 24 people, arrested 14, and 5 were killed. We put on a plaque there about 2 or 3 years ago to commemorate that. But the people who issued the orders to fire on the workers who were protesting were the local, what we call French Creole, Eurocentric whites, a man called Knowles, and his family still exists in Trinidad. And unfortunately, the police who were doing the firing were people of African descent. So that anti-colonial mindset clashed in that community with the colonial mindset. And I think this is what we have throughout the Caribbean, an anti-colonial mindset and a colonial mindset. And I think most of our current crop of politicians are of the colonial mindset or the neo-colonial mindset because they refuse to transform our institutions and even our historical spaces to reflect the decolonized mind or the decolonized mentality.
Excellent, Brother Akko. I like how you tighten up my position. So, Brother Giovanni and Brother Rolando, tell me about the colonial and anti-colonial mindsets from the 1600s when African people Brother Pinelo, I forget, that what time frame we say Africans were first documented? I think in my mind I got 1718 based on Brother, I forget. Yeah, based on his research. Was that the date that we agreed on?
Basically, we have agreed for the early 1700s. But the more we look into the dynamics of the Euro arrival into this region, we realize that, and I may borrow from Michel Trelaw's Silencing the Past, this Haitian academic, Silencing the Past, yes, the voices of people of African descent who were also a part of the Conquista. It's clear that there were people of African ancestry that were involved, that were brought in, whether as the regular rank and file, and some of them achieving levels of some hierarchy within the Spanish army. They too were in the conquest, and that is one of the chapters that is not looked at fully in it's until now that when we begin to consider that, you know what, there is more to the story than we have been told, that we realize that there are so many little details that need to be brought in. And who have been erased from those details are people of African ancestry. So we see cases, for example, and for me, because I live in the West, and with my friends across the border in the Petén region, we've had these conversations. We are aware of many individuals who were in the conquest, who were of African ancestry. Not to say that, because then we would need to go deeper into it, but they were part of it. But their stories have been erased. What is more, if we fast forward into the 1800s in this region, many of our ancestors who fled from enslavement in Belize and into Petén they managed to be integrated into the societies across the English territory, and not only in the Petén but in the Yucatan. So those chapters, this concept has to be looked at for. And I'd like to also piggyback on what Brother Ako has just mentioned, the clash in terms of the pro-colonial versus the more localized, the more Afrocentric. We find that in Belize, and this is my opinion, that in Belize, our people began to navigate between the two crowns, the English crown, the British crown, given the entire historical backdrop of an English people settled in a land claimed by Spain, but populated by the indigenous Maya. So how do you do that? And so if we look at the 100 plus years, there were people who were navigating between both, perhaps as an element of survival. And a lot of these things, when we begin to look deeper, for me, when I've tried to look at it, looking at words, and we see the transliteration of toponyms, the power of original words, and how they have survived through time and space, tells us that, hey, here the African presence can be dated farther than many of the leaders, quote unquote, generally from the colonialist times especially, have tried to suppress. And so it's an invitation. We have to carry the invitation to our younger population to assist in looking at these elements and not taking for granted what we have been taught before.
Fair enough, Brother Pinelo. On that point, I asked Christopher to show this. It's from a medium. The entity is called a medium. But it make the point, I think, both in a Columbus diary, they said that how they meet dark-skinned people. So this is what Columbus say. So that and then in this medium article over the show right now, cite one number of other credible or at least questionable sources of African presence in this region before Columbus and the other murdering companions come along with that. And as Brother Pinelo pointed out, there were some African people of African descent along with these Spanish enslavers, murderers, thieves. So that just to contextualize African presence in Belize or in the region, because they work on the Caribbean in 2025. Thanks to Brother Ako. So with the frame that now I could make Rolando talk, but I want Rolando got a mic, so I have to go a break. So when we come back, Rolando Cocom, who is the director for ISCR niche, want to share with we for him 2 cents on anti-colonial and colonial and anti-colonial sentiments or mindsets from the inception of the settlement known as the Bay of Honduras to 2025. But we're going somewhere with this because with a focus on 1888, the mindset of African people in 1888 for say August 1st, because we think we have the first one we have to celebrate African Emancipation Day, I believe, and that's why we have African Emancipation Jubilee Day, because Jubilee means 50, and it was in 1888, 50 years after 1838, August 1st, the physical liberation of chattel enslaved African people. Then I'm the first one. And they say, we represent the people of the colored population. That's what they say. And then you had the other set where no one talk about enslavement or emancipation. So we're going to our first break. Stay tuned as we come back. Rolando Cocom will have the mic.
Make every moment matter with your credit card. More transactions, more chances to win cash back. You can be one of 4 monthly winners. Get a chance to win cash back with every purchase of $100 or more. For more information, visit www.atlabank.com. Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
On July 10th, 2025, Belize Electricity Limited and Blair Atoll Power Company Limited signed a historic power purchase agreement for the development of a 15-megawatt utility-scale solar plant complete with a 1.5 megawatt, 3 megawatt-hour battery storage system. This project represents a significant milestone in building a cleaner, more sustainable, and resilient electricity grid.
Today's signing is the furthest we have ever come down the road of realizing the needed facilities and our own ambitions for harnessing the power of the sun. This PPA provides a model in which everybody, BEL, Babcock, and consumers win, and that is how it should be. We have every confidence that Babcock can and will bring this project home, and BEL publicly offers whatever support it can to realize this goal.
What we learn here will set the foundation for future projects, including solar, wind, hybrid systems, and even other emerging developing technologies, renewable energy technologies, that Belize will need if we are going to remain competitive and resilient.
BEL and Babcock will collaborate closely to develop and commission the plant within 12 to 18 months from the start of construction. Once operational, the solar plant will supply clean, renewable energy directly to the national grid, strengthening Belize's energy security and diversifying our national energy mix.
Oh man, one more scroll and my data is done.
Wait, who said anything about running out? Smart just dropped a more powerful plan that now includes social media data, so you can scroll till your fingers cramp. Visit any Smart showroom to sign up today because connectivity just got even better. Smart, bringing people together.
The hurricane season is here. Are you prepared? Get the essentials you need to stay safe this hurricane season, such as plywood, tarp and rope, first aid kit, rubber boots, raincoats and rain ponchos, generator, portable radio and batteries, flashlight and kerosene lanterns. Weather the storm with these products and more from Benny's. Quality and savings.
bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This a we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the help on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This a we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the help on the Belize and dollar because to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area.
The second half of Sunday Review, I have to keep telling myself to calm myself down. I really have to work on calm myself down. Because I know what the jalapeno is, but that's so wired. Like when I talk about black people, I just get excited. Anyways, we have Brother Mutota, co-host from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. We have the Director and Senior Research and Education Officer from ISCR Niche. And the first segment with the top about the two mindsets of colonial and anti-colonial. From the time when enslaved Africans were kidnapped, human trafficked, and brought to what they call the Americas, including Belize, and that mindset, and still having that mindset in 2025. So everybody may give them 2 cents to that. Director Rolando Cocom, time for your 2 cents. What are 2 cents, Rolando?
Yeah, so when I think about the mindsets, I ask myself, what do we mean by mindsets? And I think what we're saying is a set of ideas, ways of thinking, ways of doing things, values. And so what are the mindsets of enslavement versus what are the mindset of emancipation or liberation? And I'm reminded here, because as you said, we, especially Brother Oko, mentioned the fact that we in academics approach these things sometimes as colonialism versus post-colonialism. And one of the iconic thinkers on this for me has been Stuart Hall. And in his work, he talks a lot about hegemony versus anti-hegemony, which allows us to understand this process of control that has happened throughout the different epochs of history. And certainly the Atlantic enslavement trade being a big epoch of relevance to us. And so when we think about enslavement, then we're asking ourselves, what is enslavement? And we see enslavement in that light as a hegemonic control that is never fully stable. There's always resistance. So enslavement isn't something that, all persons who are Africans are enslaved. There's always disruption, and enslavement has to always be continuously implemented, meaning they have to pressure meaning ideally through ideas that because you have black skin, you're inferior to whites. And because you disobeyed, you will be physically and openly punished as an intimidation and as a threat that you also do not cross that line. And these are things that continuously happen in the case of Belize's history as well. So these mindsets, essentially what I'm trying to say based on that perspective is to say that mindsets are not fixed. That even the very mindset of being enslaved from the European perspective is also very much unstable. It's unstable from below and from on top. I mean, on the one hand, the whites would say black people are less than human, and yet many of them had African women as concubines and as wives, and had children with them. And so how do you make that make sense? Why is it that you're saying that black people are so inferior to you, yet you are cohabiting with them, many times through violence. And so these are the realities of what we're dealing with. And the same goes in terms of the liberation movement, right? On the one hand, you have, in most cases of Belize's history of that period of enslavement, a group of around less than 200 white people being enslavers, and more than 2,000, sometimes all the way up to 3,000 enslaved African people in this settlement, in this land, and are being controlled by such a small number. How is that possible? And it's only possible because of the dominant mindset that exists at the time. But and when we say mindset, like I said, it's not just an idea, but it's also the physical punishment that the dominant group in the society can exhibit over others. And so today's case, Sister YaYa, I think you are very much on point when you talk about the state being hegemonic, and then people from below trying to fight off against that, because the state also controls the apparatus of punishment. And so I think, you know, the reality is that we do need to pay attention to how these mindsets shape our reality, because they continue to do. And in fact, one of the things that we always talk about when we talk about history is that we are products of history as much as we are potential producers of history. And so that is the reality of life. In this case, we are particularly interested to understand how one dominant concept or ideology of race has shaped much of our understanding, shaped much of the way the lives of African people during this period of enslavement was controlled, and how they resisted that control as a category of identification, meaning because your skin is darker than others, you are inferior. And how does that legacy continue to play a role in modern Belize and in the Caribbean and in this globalized world? And so I just wanted to give my 2 cents on that, based on some of the readings and perspective that I've learned over time.
Respect. This second one different for me, because I want to hear Brother Akon, Brother Pinelo with a build upon one another conversation and vibes. Because indeed, because of the legacy that we born into, we born with one level of enslavement, whether you're colonial or anti-colonial. And based on your environment and your personal choices will determine your level of enslavement or liberation. So when I think about, you know, what the Mayor Motley, not Mayor Motley, the Barbados Prime Minister, Mia Motley, like, she get a lot of respect, right? But I would say she's a woman of the hegemony. So I think 2 things are true at the same time. It's not as if the woman has never done, but I recognize that she's another kind of African woman leadership that I would want to represent me. Now, if I had to pick one, that Esther Jose, for damn sure. The difference is they not separate themselves from the community. And that's why I not say how you could ever be in a political life and do any meaningful change, because that the system where enslaved we people, that system never designed for the liberation of people. And at Flag and Anthem Independence, there was no intentional dismantling of these systems of oppression. So Brother Pinelo and then Brother Ako, what the phone take, and I really appreciate Rolando taking time for describe what mindset is. What the phone take, especially when it comes to people of power and influence in the region, based on their level of enslavement, what can the people do for liberate themselves? Because of the hegemony of the state, for example, I'm going to give you an example of that. But so you got government of Belize, right? They're the machinery. Then you have 2 black groups like the National Council and the National Governor Council. Now, whenever the government need a black face, they could go to one or there, 2 or then they want to get in black face for whatever they want to do. Now, remember now, the government just that a mechanism from the British enslaver colonizer. That's why UEF now mingle up with the state, because we clear. that never make for we liberation. We have to work for we all awareness and liberate ourselves. But as you learn, you grow, you know, you find people like them too, brother, you could have connections. Brother Ako say, yeah, sometimes you have to engage. You say that they got grassroots diplomats. I am not one of them. So I really want to look at this because this is where we are, even at the Caribbean level. When we look at what's happening with Trump, Cuba, make we say if the new Prime Minister Blaise will come out and say, I want to give up my visa in solidarity with the Cuban people, make we say. So the question I ask the two owner, based on what Rolando just said, is what can the people of the Caribbean do, overstanding that these governments are mechanism of the hegemony and that the political leadership, I mean, you could only stay at that if you go on deep level of enslavement. Because I don't know how you could be liberated and stay in our political system unless, you know, that Grenada, that different. So I'm going to hear 2 cents, Brother Pinelo, and then Brother Ako.
All right. I like to look at it in this sense that I come to a realization that it depends on the people themselves. A lot of what we do, and I can align it with the work that I do. And in fact, even before I even started working with the Institute for Social and Cultural Research, I can use a clear example of Benque. If you've ever come to Benque Viejo del Carmen, make sure that you visit the Centennial Park, the Centenario. This is the old cemetery, the oldest cemetery in town, which has now been converted into perhaps the most environmentally friendly space, where we try to educate our young people to understand that that is a space that is sacred, in the sense that that is where our ancestors were buried. And with all the Christian rites, etc., the fact remains that the founders of our community were buried there. Our good friend David Ruiz and others, many others, elders included, we started in the 1980s in our youthful years to collect the stories of our peoples. How this community came to be, what were the values, what are the principles, what was the vision of the founding fathers. And so here we would be talking about maybe 6 generations back, but the stories had been passed on. And so the Centennial Park, there came a time in the 1990s when a politician aimed to wreck the cemetery, create it into a landfill for private lotification. And as a group, we stood up, and the case was put forward. If anybody's going to benefit from this parcel of land where our ancestors lie, it has to be the entire community. Fast forward to 2000, and we get the House of Culture, where many of us have made presentations, many of our community members have carried out research and presented to the community, where the marimba, which of course is of African ancestry, even though many say it's Maya, it's a combination in any case, where that has been promoted, where we often gather with many people, and we have visitors coming and share their knowledge too. What I'm saying is that we began from early, and we understand that our ancestors, African and indigenous, and even Europeans, because remember I said our people had to navigate around the British crown, and many of our ancestors who also came as migrants from the Spanish republics had to also navigate in this region. But the fact remains that their values, their principles, their stories, our history was transmitted. And there's an organization in Benque called CACHE, the Community of Artists for Cultural and Historical Endeavors, which, yes, it does highlight more of the mestizo culture, but the key thing here is that it is inclusive. For example, at the end of this month, there is what we call the International Festival of Culture and Arts. And so many organizations, many other groups, individuals are part of how we share the commonality that our people have had. It's a grassroots organization as such. And so when we consider that our African ancestors and that our indigenous ancestors had values and principles, that they had practices and knowledge that were similar, and we realize that the Europeans, to a large degree, sought to divide and conquer, divide et impera, by highlighting differences rather than the commonalities that we have. At least in our community, it has come to be, it met with, it was not successful. That was not successful. It's our indigenous teachings that have survived. And so I've gone all around to simply say this. When peoples understand who they are, when we realize the common threads that bind us, we are stronger. And when we have the values that our ancestors have put forth, we can do a lot of things. And that is when the state will realize, when those persons representing the state realize that, guess what? We got to do something to assist. We have to listen. We have to be part of that grassroots movement that is bringing forth those values, those principles, that identity that the new nation state of Belize so proudly talks about. So you have to put action into the thoughts. And I think that it has to come from the people. So when we see, for example, the Maya peoples with the deer dance, or the Charicanari being brought out, or the festivities in some of the traditional Creole communities, and so on, the realization is that it is the people who make things happen. But for people to know, to be able to do that, they have to know who they are. And so the mantra, know yourself, is very, very, very powerful.
Big thanks, Brother Pinelo. You put a lot of knowledge out there. You make a think about that cemetery that you have, bruh. I never been there when it happened, but I grew up into the cemetery. I used to play on the grave where people now live on. I'm like, when our people treat the dead with disrespect, it tell you the soul of them people there. I don't know enough stories, so I don't think anybody can organize and push back on the housing development when all they on the bones of and I know European people buried it too. But Brother Akko, the mic that for you.
Okay, so I wanted to just make a comment on what Brother Rolando said. In his presentation, when he spoke about liberation. It's an important distinction to make, which I think in the Caribbean we are not doing. Now, we had the period of oppression, what some Africans call the Ma'afa, East Africans call it the Ma'afa, which was the enslavement of Africans crossing the Atlantic Ocean. But again, language is very important, because the European has been able to use language to always diminish their role and confuse us in the roles they play. So recently, they have been talking about the transatlantic slave trade. As one of the scholars said, the Atlantic never enslaved anybody. It is the Europeans who did. And so all in the popular media and imagination, you're hearing about the transatlantic slave trade. There was no transatlantic slave. There was a European slave trade in which Europeans went to various parts of the world, particularly in Africa, and enslaved people. But by saying transatlantic, we are letting them off the hook, because that's what they want. They don't want their children to understand the role they played in the oppression of other people. Okay? So they keep using language, all kinds of language, to distance themselves and their genocidal and barbaric acts, right, historically. And so it's important that we understand. But the important point, the other important point he made was about liberation. Because emancipation was just one process. So after we fought and revolted, they were forced to declare enslaved people free. And from emancipation, we were supposed to move toward the road of liberation. Unfortunately, the colonial system that they put in place was an obstacle to that process of liberation. And then when we finally saw the light, they created something called independence. But by that time, they had trained an elite of politicians and educators and other kinds of professionals to continue the same system, which is what is called the neo-colonial system, to prevent us to see what is called liberation. And that is the struggle we are engaged in right now. That's why we still have hair discrimination. That's why we still have what Brother Pinelo spoke about, and I think Rolando, skin discrimination. Because if you are liberated, and liberation is a process in which you decolonize all the old thoughts, all the old attributes, all the old indoctrination and conditioning, because that is what we get through our education system. Indoctrination and a certain kind of conditioning to accept things as they are, to accept systems that do not work in our interest, to accept mediocrity. And at the end of it, again, it prevents us from seeing the light of liberation. Now, we are supposed to be discussing ideas about what is better for us. And if you look at, for example, voodoo, I think Brother Pinelo spoke about the indigenous people. Now, a lot of people don't know that in the voodoo practice, the first deity that they call is an indigenous deity. It is not an African. Because in constructing the theological framework of what is called voodoo, the Africans said that they were not there first, that there were people before them. And so they recognize this, and there is the first deity in the practice is an indigenous deity. The other thing that the Haitians do is celebrate the Haitian Revolution from 1791 to 1804. And in 1791, there was an indigenous revolt. So they said, we came here and met people who were here. And we must, in our narrative of history, acknowledge the contribution of those people because they were here in this land before us. But it's only a liberated people could think that way. You see, to recognize all of the people who were here. Look, we do something in Trinidad. You see it in the rum shops and so on, where when men go and drink, they throw some of the alcohol on the ground, which is the term doesn't come to me. Libation, which is a libation. All of this is part of our tradition as indigenous people. Anywhere you go, where indigenous people, whether it's in Africa, Latin America, Australia, wherever, we offer libation. This is part of our tradition. So a lot of what the Africans came and met, they could identify. This is why in St. Vincent, the Garifunas are syncretic people of indigenous and Africans. You understand? So this is why the Caribbean is unique. So the point is, we have to distinguish our emancipation process and what it should lead to, which is the liberation process. And part of it is we move from emancipation, we move to independence and so on. But we have to move toward liberation. And this is where we challenge systems of education. We challenge even our politics. Why are we still in a state where we are functioning through a British Westminster model of so-called democracy? Why can't we see how we can incorporate some kind of indigenous models? Because they exist, right? In different parts of the Caribbean and in South America. But it's only a liberated people can think to incorporate our indigenous methodologies as we move towards creating the kind of states we want. The other thing I wanted to talk about, based on what the two comrades said also, is the issue of colonialism as a disruptive force. Colonialism was not benign. It was violent, even though it was not as violent as the Columbus expedition. Because there is a psychological violence it imposes on people that said because you are darker, you are inferior. Because your hair is woolly, it is not good here. And we still use those terms in the Caribbean. You sometimes in parts of Trinidad, you still hear people say bad hair and good hair. And all of this is part of this retention of colonialism, which means we are not liberated. Because if we are liberated from these colonial indoctrinations, we would not be talking about good hair, bad hair, good skin, and bad skin. Yeah. So it is a process that we have to fight at all levels and challenge. And I think it is important, you say I like to talk about books. It is important that we study what Fanon wrote in his book called Black Skin, White Masks, in which he analyzed the mindset, we're going back to the mindset, right? Or the narrative of the colonizer in terms of defining our reality. And there is another interesting book by a Tunisian scholar in North Africa called The Colonizer and the Colonized, Albert Memmi. And he spoke of what happens to the colonized mind and how the colonizer can trigger certain things in order for us to respond not in our own interest. So the process is that we have to study our own indigenous systems, our own culture, and as Brother Giovanni said, important milestones are important, like marking our historical sites like that cemetery is very important. Marking that historical site like we did in Rio Claro, Trinidad, and other sites, these are markers towards our liberation, telling us this is where we came from. This is what we must remember in order to take us where we must go. And I think it is important that the struggle to decolonize be maintained, that we understand the whole methodology of colonization and what it has done to us if we are to liberate ourselves. And the final point I'll make is about our politicians. Our politicians are merely maintainers and managers of this system. And we cannot place faith in them. This reminds me of this phrase, I think it's an Ethiopian quote. And I repeat it, I speak about it all the time. And I particularly refer to that when Barack Obama came into power. And it says, when the axe came to the forest, the trees had a discussion and they said, worry not, Handle is one of us. Because the handle is made of wood. But Handle and axe proceeded to chop the forest down. And that to me is how our politicians are. They look like us. I'll put it in Sister YaYa's from all kinfolk in our skinfolk, right? So we have to understand that our politicians are not necessarily serving our interests, even though at times they may be well-intentioned. But the system that they inherited, which they are not prepared to change, does not allow them the leeway to transform our societies and lead it towards the world of liberation. That's what I would say for the time.
Big respect, big respect. It's just how I like what the show, you know, when they have it. I mean, we call it, this is what we are talking about. But I like when the conversation grow organically and it really, I feel like I watch TV. You can tell when I get at the levels because I just listen. I really thank you. We have another half an hour, so we have to come back after this break and share at the top of the last half hour. We'll share. Well, for me, it was Anne McPherson, chapter 4. What book that come out, Rolando? I know that chapter 4, but I don't know what book it come out. You know?
Yeah, it's a book on race and ethnicity in Latin America and the Caribbean.
You have the book?
I don't have the book. Maybe I've seen some other chapters, but I've seen the table of contents. Yeah.
I need that book. When we come back, I have it electronically, the chapter that we'll be referring to. And then we also have some slides that Giovanni and Rolando brought that we'll show in this last half hour for come full circle about hopefully a collaboration with the Bad Education Foundation and the ISCR niche to put a marker at the corner of Duck Street and Church Lane, because in 1888 some of our African ancestresses and ancestors, and I have to say ancestresses because the women were pivotal, and that's one big point in the male leadership, and then paraded through the street on August 1st, 1888 and 1889, and then the private fundraising. And I tell people about for stop drink or smoke, I think something like that, for save them money for put towards. But then I think 1893 or 92, a severe storm came and knocked it down, almost completely built. We have to put a marker there. So on August 1st, we know that one group of people that believes, me very aware that one day worth remembering and not forget what they gone through for make them get at a level of awareness. Break time, when I come right back.
Tired of replacing light bulbs? LEDs are what you need. LEDs last up to 30,000 hours. That's 30 times longer than incandescent bulbs, and up to 8 times longer than compact fluorescents. So less changing and less trash. Planet Earth thanks you. And the LED experts at Brothers Habet and Habet will help you find the best LED solution with colors for every room and mood, starting as low as $6.95. You can even get LED strips for home, office, and industrial use. So say goodbye to fluorescent tubes forever. And because they use up to 90% less energy, you save money. Money you can spend on other things. So head to Brothers Habet or Habet and Habet today. You can also call, email, or Facebook us. Have a brilliant day.
En Atlantic Bank, tu comodidad es nuestra prioridad. Nuestro centro de contacto está diseñado para mejorar tu experiencia bancaria. Con una amplia gama de opciones de servicio al cliente, ahorras tiempo y esfuerzo. Puedes llamar fácilmente para bloquear o desbloquear tus tarjetas de débito y crédito, realizar consultas de cuentas y acceder a información detallada de tus tarjetas. Ya sea que necesites asistencia con la banca en línea, apoyo para comercios o consultas generales, nuestro equipo está listo para ayudarte. Para mayor comodidad, si todos los operadores están ocupados, puedes dejar tu número y un operador te devolverá la llamada lo antes posible para asegurarse de que recibas el apoyo que necesitas. Para mayor seguridad, es posible que necesitemos verificar tu identidad con un conjunto de preguntas sencillas. Recuerda, Atlantic Bank nunca solicitará tu nombre de tu usuario ni contraseña de Atlantic Online por llamada telefónica, mensaje de texto o correo electrónico, asegurando que tu información personal permanezca segura y protegida. Nuestro equipo de apoyo está disponible de lunes a viernes, de 8 a.m. a 6 p.m. en inglés y en español. Simplemente marca al 223-1212. Esta es la línea dedicada para nuestro centro de contacto. Atlantic Bank se compromete a brindarte un servicio excepcional y las herramientas que necesitas para administrar tus finanzas de manera conveniente y segura. Aprovecha al máximo nuestro servicio del centro de contacto.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
In our world that's always changing, one thing stays the same.
Our promise as Smart Belize to keep you connected.
Connected to the moments, the people, and the future that matter most.
With every new tower, our service upgrades, and every new smile, we're keeping our promise in building more than a network.
We're building a future, a family as Smart Belize. From Punta Gorda to Corozal, we are here not just as a network, but as your partner in progress.
We have grown significantly over the past 20 years, and we just keep growing. Thank you for placing your trust in us. We remain dedicated to providing meaningful connections that bring value in every way that matters to you. We continue to bring people together.
Tired of replacing light bulbs? LEDs are what you need. LEDs last up to 30,000 hours. That's 30 times longer than incandescent bulbs, and up to 8 times longer than compact fluorescents. So less changing and less trash. Planet Earth thanks you. And the LED experts at Brothers Habet and Habet will help you find the best LED solution with colors for every room and mood, starting as low as $6.95. You can even get LED strips for home, office, and industrial use. So say goodbye to fluorescent tubes forever. And because they use up to 90% less energy, you save money. Money you can spend on other things. So head to Brothers Habet or Habet and Habet today. You can also call, email, or Facebook us. Have a brilliant day.
It's that time of the year again. The Belize Carnival Association proudly presents the annual King and Queen competitions. Watch as your favorite carnival band bring gigantic jaw-dropping costume to life, bursting with creativity, color, and unstoppable energy. It all goes down at the Belize Civic Center on August 23rd, 2025. Pre-judging starts at 5 p.m. with the main show at 7 p.m. Enjoy the live performances by Kenny G and the New Creation Band and experience the magic of Carnival like never before. Tickets are only $15 for adults, $5 for kids. Be there, feel the energy, and celebrate Carnival.
Guatemala, maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the help and the Belize and dollar because
on the review, Brother Akko Mutota, a guest, Brother Giovanni Pinelo, and Rolando Cocom from ISCR Niche. And we'll start off with how I became aware that African people in Belize recognized August 1st as Emancipation Day. So, Christy, if you could bring up Chapter 4, Imagining the Colonial Nation, Race, Gender, and Middle Class Politics in Belize, 1888, 1898, Anne S. McPherson. And under a section called the Emancipation Jubilee and People's Hall Project, 1888-1893, I read quickly. On 1st August 1888, those Belizeans who identified themselves as descendants of slaves celebrated the 50th anniversary of emancipation, presenting themselves to the governor as representative of, quote, the colored population of the colony, end quote. Organized by an all-male committee headed by laborer Simon Lamb, along with, quote, a considerable number of women, end quote, and several school teachers, the Emancipation Jubilee indicated the capacity for the Black identified self-organization involving Black and mixed-raced women, and made no mention of 1798 as a date of any significance for Black Belizeans. Organizers asked for an educational institution rather than political rights, but they did not look to the middle-class Creoles as their spokesmen. So that's how I first became aware of this. Now, let me give the mic to Brother Pinelo, Brother Rolando, then come with slides prepared for talk about the importance of African people, 50 years after the legal liberation of chattel enslavement in Belize, identifying as such and remembering their enslavement process and what they wanted to do on August 1st. So, Brother Pinelo, Brother Rolando, I want to go ahead and tell me what slide you want.
Yeah, so I think, like you, I became more aware of this event through historian Ann's research, and then did some more review of those records at the Belize Archives and Records Service. And I was, like you, astonished and asked myself, how is it that this very important memory does not seem to exist at the time? But since then, a lot has changed. in terms of especially your work, Sister YaYa, and the UAF's work together to celebrate emancipation. And we learn a lot about, as we've been discussing, these two mindsets, right? How do we acknowledge what happened to Belize's African ancestors during the period of enslavement? And it has a lot to do with these two dominant ideology, one of resisting enslavement versus one of accommodating or accepting enslavement. And when we look at this period, 1888, we find one of the principal leaders, joined by others, and especially, as you mentioned, women, is Simon Lamb. And in doing some review of who Simon Lamb was, if we could go to that slide, I think it's slide 19, if I'm not mistaken, we see that Simon Lamb was born just prior to full legal, just prior to full legal emancipation, and would have been an apprentice. Who would not have been apprentice because of his age. He would have been 1 year old at the time. And so remember, if we're thinking about enslavement in Belize, in 1834, we have the end of enslavement, but the introduction of a system called apprenticeship, where the enslavers were to be in the parliament agreeing to abolish enslavement, agreed that this is a form of compensation and a necessary, quote unquote, necessary, what we would call transition point for the previously enslaved people to learn to become employees and workers and laborers, and as part of the system of apprenticeship, which was the last 6 years, but which only lasted 4 years because of all the chaos that ensued under the apprenticeship system across the Caribbean, with full legal emancipation on August 1st, 1838. So Simon Lamb, as we were able to gather from the archival records, was less than 1 year old when the 1834 emancipation came into place. And his parents would not have been fully freed until 1st August 1838. And so Simon Lamb then is able to would have seen the atrocities of enslavement and see how this practice of apprenticeship was so hard on his own parents and family. And I think that is important to remember, and would have likely been the similar scenario with other members, I suspect, of his committee that chose to organize and remember emancipation in 1888. As you said, there were several things that were done for that major celebration, including a parade, and we have a full transcription record of this, Sister YaYa, which we will have to do on another occasion, of the 1888 record of it. I mean, these records are tainted by the Eurocentric views, of course. It was from the Colonial Guardian, but it gives us an idea at least of what they did. So one of the things that we talked about in our previous session here is that we have to read against the archive. They recorded what happened, but from their point of view, and we have to read in between the lines to figure out what was happening, because nobody would record in that piece that Simon Lamb parents were enslaved. You know, they don't point those things out. We have to now do those readings to say, why is it that this was so important to the organizers and the people of African descent. You already mentioned that part of that project was when they got to the government house and presented themselves, they asked the governor to support an initiative that would establish a people's hall, a learning center, essentially they called it, where they could, and I like the word that they used, where they could repair. And I liked it because I searched for the word, what it would have meant at the time. When they use repair, they wanted to say where we can go, where we can gather. And given today's context of talking about repair in the sense of repairing the damages of enslavement in terms of reparations, I find it to be a good alignment to the work that UEF is doing. And so in 1888, they bring up this idea of having a people's hall, an institute, and there's the two mindsets are very clearly present. On the one hand, you have the same editor of the Colonial Guardian, I think his name was Frederick Gann, who said, we don't need this memory. We need to remember that enslaved people fought together with the whites to defend the settlement. That is the memory that we need. And so again, that's the colonial mindset versus the anti-colonial mindset, which, to be fair and to be honest, is that these mindsets are always shifting, and people find themselves in different positions over time. And in the case of Simon Lamb, he would later, and I believe I have it there in one of the slides, and to my knowledge, I find that by 1909, he himself was also in the parade celebrating the Battle of St. George's Key Day, which became popular only after the ruling class had done so much to discourage people from celebrating emancipation and putting resources for the celebration of St. George's Key Day, especially after that centenary celebration in 1898. And so that's the reality of what we are faced with even up to today, these two shifting these mindsets. But the work of Simon Lamb and the People's Hall Project was also unfortunately delayed and never met full completion because of a storm, which you mentioned, Sister YaYa, having destroyed the building in 1893. And we understand that building to have been on Church Street, at the corner of Church Street and Duck Lane, as the records show. And so we are, at least ISCR and Niche, very eager to see how a monument can be put there to recognize that memory and to build upon that memory with today's African descendants and other Belizeans who agree that this history has to be told, this history of organizing and fighting for emancipation. And so we also have several more records there which show that the parade started from very early in the morning. It was delayed a bit by rain, which even up to today, it usually sometimes rains in the morning. But the town would have heard a music band playing from 5 o'clock that morning, and getting ready for the parade, which started around 8 a.m. that morning and proceeded through the principal streets. And people remember this in oral traditions, Sister YaYa. I've since learned that the memory of Simon Lamb goes all the way into the 1930s. But his first action and that of the committee and of the women of celebrating emancipation, that side was stifled out by all of the propaganda that was placed on the Battle of St. George's Key. So that's in a nutshell some of the key things that we wanted to share, and I'm sure my colleague Giovanni has some other insights that are important for us to reflect on.
Go ahead, Brother Giovanni.
Yes, so we find though that as we have been talking about the mindsets, one of the things that and that I want to share too is the fact, as Rolando has said, from the archival documents, the oral history, as he finished off a while ago, there's also archival documentation that goes beyond the Colonial Guardian. The Angelus, which was a Catholic newsletter of the time, in its September edition of 1888, highlights some of the events that were occurring in Belize. In fact, in speaking about things that were going on, and as I am able to pick out, we find that the year 1887 into 1888, it was Queen Victoria's Jubilee. And again, about overshadowing a more important event for the grassroots people. We find that the highlight in most of the newspapers, in most of the archival sources, is Queen Victoria's Jubilee, 50 years on the throne. We also find that Pope Leo XIII, the famous one with his encyclical Rerum Novarum on social justice, he also is celebrating his 50 years in the priesthood. And that there was the canonization of, and if you're looking for the slide, it would be slide 23, I believe. The canonization of St. John Birchmans, SJC, Belize City. And St. Peter Claver, as we know in southern Belize. But a more important event, I would think, internationally, was the emancipation of our enslaved ancestors in Brazil, which was official on the 13th of May, 1888. That doesn't get the coverage. Luckily for us, the Angelus, this Catholic newspaper, does in its September edition highlight many of the things that Rolando has just shared. The salute at the courthouse at 6 a.m., the procession which began at 8 a.m. There was at 11 a.m. there was a call for divine service in all places of worship, followed by a dinner. And interestingly, they went to 3 places: the asylum, the hospital, and the poorhouse is what is mentioned. And then at 3 p.m. there was the procession of the day and other movements around Government House, including the playing of cricket in Belize City. So the long and short of it is that the year 1888 had several milestones, but a key milestone in the story of Belize, that of the celebrating the Jubilee of Emancipation, was overshadowed by other things. Today, we are in the effort, and again, kudos to UEF, into ensuring that the memory of our African ancestors, of our indigenous peoples, should not go in vain. And we're glad to see what we can do to bring up the records, and more than that, to be supportive of the grassroots movements, because these are what truly make us Belize.
Respect. Let me say that UEF is carrying the baton of UBAD Educational Foundation. Mandela Newspaper, 55 years, Creme Radio, 35 years, UEF, 29 years, XTV, 21 years, with support of the wider community. I really value the knowledge here today. Brother Ako, it's 11:57. What are your final thoughts?
It is how our history is so similar, and because we do not know each other's history, we are not able to respond in particular ways. And I'm saying this in the context of listening to both Brother Giovanni and Brother Rolando, speaking about Simon Lamb, and how Simon Lamb's attempt to continue the celebration of emancipation was obscured by the Jubilee celebration of the British Crown. And this is what I was saying about the colonial and decolonial. This is a pattern. They're always trying to, even today, all these things you see Trump is doing is to obscure us from seeing our own reality. Now, the context I want to refer to is Trinidad and Tobago. There was a Trinidadian called Mozumbo Lazare. He was the first Trinidadian to change his name to an African name. His parents were from Guadeloupe. Remember, Trinidad had a lot of people from the French Caribbean coming to Trinidad from Martinique and Guadeloupe in the light of the cellular depopulation, okay, after the French Revolution. And so his parents came from Guadeloupe, but he was born in Trinidad. And he changed his name to Lazare, an African name. And he was the first recorded Trinidadian to demand the observation of Emancipation Day. And he got the British to agree to celebrate Emancipation Day in Trinidad. Then about 25 years later, the British switched and started celebrating Discovery Day. So when I grew up, August the 1st was Discovery Day. Until the organization I joined, the National Joint Action Committee, we fought the government every year to return to Emancipation Day, and eventually Trinidad became the first country in the English-speaking Caribbean to declare Emancipation Day a public holiday in the mid-1970s. I don't remember the exact, I think it was 75 or somewhere there. So you are hearing the presentation by Brother Pinelo and Brother Cocom about what happened in Belize, British colony. And if you can trace that throughout every Caribbean, where they always obscure the events and the days that are important to us. This is why we have to organize around our own issues. We have to be able to recognize our own history and promote what is in our interest. But to do that, at the level of the politics, we have to confront the education system to ensure that these things are either part of the formal curriculum or part of the informal curriculum to promote a sense of civic responsibility, a sense of patriotism, which is what we are lacking. I remember when I was in primary school, we had something called civics. Okay? That doesn't exist anymore, as far as I know, in the Caribbean. So this is what I think from listening to the two comers here, we have to remember our own history. Memory is important. I think Rolando spoke about that earlier. Memory is important because part of the process of colonization, right, and neo-colonization is to make us forget who we are, what we have accomplished, and what our history is. So it is very important that we remember. I am finished, Sister YaYa.
I think Sister YaYa is having a glitch there on her.
A glitch? Side. Yeah, so I don't know what is happening.
But big respect, Brother Oko. I think that was a very insightful conclusion, I would say, of the realities of Belize, very similar across the Caribbean in terms of how ideology was maneuvered to stifle resistance and stifle liberation. And I certainly agree that we need to better understand not just our nation's history, but also the regional history would give us a greater understanding of who we are in the world amid very great challenges of economy, climate change, all our different vulnerabilities. So big respect to that. Certainly from my end, because I also see the time running on the corner, want to thank Sister YaYa for having us on the show. We learned a lot in this exchange. Sister YaYa.
Greetings. You know, we got Blackout Party. Yeah. This is 2 times today.
You are twisted. You have to change your phone.
Okay, yeah, because I had to hurry up.
Yeah, right.
Camera.
You're good
Thank
now.
you, Brother Akko.
Yeah.
I tell you, Brother Akko. Oh, give thanks and praises. I have, I lost contact just now, but I'm glad that we have a good co-host and somebody at the MCA room for carry on the show. I don't know if Brother Pinelo had an opportunity to give his final thoughts.
No, yeah, but Brother Rolando did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brother Pinelo, quickly.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage all our audience to look for Leon Kibera's The Spider's Web. In African short stories, The Spider's Web, as well as Jomo Kenyatta's Gentlemen of the Jungle. 2 short stories that are very, very instructive. And more along the lines too, I would like that especially our younger generation begin to commit time with elders, to hear their oral stories, principles, our philosophies. And more importantly, let's begin to be more supportive of our grassroots organizations. There's so much that this nation is built on that its basis is small organizations. So with that then, thank you very much.
Big thanks, Brother Giovanni, Pinelo, and Rolando Cocom. I always come prepared. And they're from the Institute for Social and Cultural Research under the National Institute of Culture and Research. Expect we continue to collaborate for share the knowledge as we move towards August 1st, 2025, and putting a marker at that spot that was the Emancipation Institute, known as the People's Hall. As it relates to oral tradition, our father was born in 1940. He's going to be 85 this year. And he remember, and them lived on George Street, that they lived in Simon Lamb's house. When I come home in 2006, I still want 2-story wooden house. And his mother living downstairs, they used to carry flowers that Simon Lamb grave. I don't know if that's on his birthday or if that's on the day of death, but my father has a living memory and whole ghost story about that. So yeah, I could confirm what they say, Rolando. Encouraging Belizeans to stay, like Brother Pinelo said, stay close to elders, gather stories, record if you can. And Brother Akko, as always, big thanks for the moments like this affirm why we in the Caribbean, UEF interest the African descendants racialized as Black people. That not mean that we don't recognize that indigenous people were here before. And not everybody make for work with me, so to a part people willing for work, then that is beautiful. But it's important that we acknowledge that the indigenous people were here and that African people were here as well. So with that said, this show I'll repeat at 3:30 today. I can't look for say that who that I look for say who that the security guard. The security guard is, oh my goodness, I don't know who that security guard. Respect security guard. And then Christy said did communicate with Brother Akko that I had blackout. So thanks, Christy. And then the Master Chief Operator is Christy Flowers. I know I had you confused with all the things where I sent to the Christy, but as always, very professional work with Shane Flowers. Respect security guard. At Creme Ranger, we have Larry Guerrero, known as Larry G. We got a little bit over time, but we want to thank everybody again. On to share this link with XTV YouTube, XTV Belize YouTube, XTV Belize Facebook page. Share the link with people in the region around the world, because and I want to brothers have one absolutely peaceful rest of the Sunday, and never forget say, only the people want to save the people.
Save the people.
Country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This time we don't fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This time we don't fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This time my name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the help and the Belize and dollar.